Hey everyone, welcome back. Now, we've been off there for a few weeks now because there's been some family issues, a few health issues, but we're back now finally, and we are focusing once again on the Marvel television universe. Now, I know we've only recently covered WandaVision on the channel, but it's probably the biggest show in the world right now, and also we're not just focusing on WandaVision, we're also going to be talking about Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Loki as well in this video. Now, what are we going to be doing? Well, it's going to be one of those videos that I've done a couple of times before on the channel, and I'm going to be sorting the characters from all three of these shows into Hogwarts houses, because obviously that's the best way of getting a bite-sized read on all of their character personality traits. Now, before I begin, just a couple of quick things. First off, there is a spoiler warning in effect for WandaVision. So if you haven't watched up to episode 7, which is the most recent at the time of recording this, then go off, watch that now, and then come back. But definitely remember to come back and watch this video afterwards. And the second thing is that these are just my opinions. I do not expect you to agree with everything I have to say, and in fact, I welcome the discussion down in the comments below. So with all that being said, let's kick things straight off. Now, I'm only going to be focusing on the three shows that I just mentioned in my little preamble just then, and that's because they are the most imminent arrivals, or they're currently being released, and we know a little bit more about them, and even these ones that I'm going to be including, we still don't even know much about the two that are upcoming, but I'm going to be trying my best anyway. I'm going to start things off with Loki. Now, Loki is the furthest in the future of the three series I'm going to be covering here, and as such, there's the least to talk about. That's why I'm starting with it. Now, the only two characters of note that have been confirmed so far for Loki are Tom Hiddleston playing the titular God of Mischief, and Owen Wilson playing a character called Mobius M Mobius. Now, starting off with the former of the two, and perhaps the easiest decision I had to make in the entire video, and that of course is Loki. Now, Loki is a Slytherin. He might even be more of a Slytherin than Tom Riddle himself. I mean, he wears green, for God's sake. Loki is the God of Mischief, which just screams Slytherin. He's also extremely cunning, very ambitious, he's constantly looking for power, the throne of Asgard, rule over Earth, whatever it may be, and he's always looking out for a numero uno. Now, Loki, of course, does have some redeeming qualities, and it's mean to say that just being a Slytherin makes you evil. I'm sure there are plenty of Slytherins out there who vehemently disagree with the fact that Slytherin means you're evil. And I do agree with that, there is a lot to be said, however there will be a bit of a theme in this video that a lot of the villains will end up being Slytherins, but that's just kind of the way things work. Most of the time villains are ambitious, most of the time they are cunning and all that kind of stuff, so it only makes sense. Anyway, Loki, 100% Slytherin, no questions. Now on to an interesting one, and that's Mobius, or Moby as he's sometimes referred to in the comics. Now, Moby is a time agent, and by the looks of it, at least from what I can tell at just like a little bit of research, he's a very dedicated and to the letter time agent. I mean, I would assume as a time agent you kind of have to be kind of to the letter, because otherwise you get lots of paradoxes and all that kind of stuff. That's exactly what they're there to police and all that kind of thing. But because of this, because he's a stickler for the rules and that kind of stuff, he's very straight-laced, all that, I think he's a Ravenclaw. Moving on from Loki onto Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I'm going to start with the two titular characters, and of those two, beginning with Falcon. Now, I think Falcon's probably the easiest of the two to sort because I think he's definitely a Gryffindor. There's one major reason why I think this, and it's because Steve Rogers made him the next Captain America, which, I mean, to be Captain America you have to represent all of this sort of courage and bravery and that kind of thing, and of course, those are the traits of a Gryffindor. I don't think anyone out there would probably argue with the fact that Cap himself is definitely a Gryffindor, and I think that Sam definitely has to share some of those traits in order to be the next Cap. Also, outside of that, if you just look at his character without any of the sort of being the prodigy of Steve Rogers, I think that he definitely suits being a Gryffindor anyway. He is brave, he is courageous, he does rush in a little bit sometimes without thinking, which of course is another big Gryffindor tick. I mean, Harry does it all the time. And I just think he suits the house really well. Now, Bucky is a slightly trickier one. When he's the Winter Soldier, of course, he has this sort of ruthless side to him, and I guess you could say that maybe that makes him a Slytherin, although I'm not sold on that at all. But also, I mean, as the Winter Soldier, he's not even himself. He's being brainwashed by Hydra. So of course he's not going to be fitting his exact personality traits. From what we see of Bucky outside of him being this ruthless, cold-blooded assassin, we see that he's quite a brave person. I mean, if you look at just Captain America the First Avenger itself, there has to be a reason why they would want to revive Bucky to become this Master Assassin, other than the possibility down the line of messing with Steve Rogers' head in some way. And that's probably because he was a very good soldier, a very brave person, and most likely a Gryffindor. Now onto another interesting one, and I'm going to talk about US Agent, who will be played by Wyatt Russell, and his alias is John Walker. Now, of course, we don't know a huge amount about what this iteration of US Agent is going to be like. Quite often in the comic books, he is in the Dark Avengers lineup and is the sort of replacement as Steve Rogers, so you'd have thought he'd be quite a dark person. However, I don't think that's the route they're going to go down in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I very much feel like John Walker is going to be this kind of pawn in a bigger plan. I think some government agency, maybe Baron Zemo as the main bad guy, something along those lines, is going to get to him and sort of use him, manipulate him in order to have their own Captain America that they've got more control of. Now, I think what this might likely be, based on the fact that we've seen him running out onto a high school football game or a college football game, whatever it might be, is I think he's going to be some sort of like big high school quarterback, something like that. Really popular guy at school, a bit jockish, that kind of thing. And maybe he gets some sort of horrible injury and gets paralysed, and then the government come to him and say, we can fix you up if you become US Agent, effectively. And then he's got this personality, he's got all of these friends from school and stuff who look up to him. He sort of embodies the Steve Rogers kind of aura that we want to get from a new Captain America, except now he's completely under the thumb of whoever did this to him. I think this would be quite interesting. I have no idea if it's going to happen, it's entirely speculative, but if that is the case, I'd say he's a jockish Gryffindor. Think Cormac McLagan from Half-Blood Prince. Now, I briefly mentioned him a minute ago when I was talking about US Agent, and I'm going to go on to talk about Baron Zemo a little bit more now. Now, I think he's an interesting one because as a villain, I don't think he's inherently evil at all. I think that he's been downtrodden and he's sort of been chipped away by his life, whether that be losing Sokovia, losing his family in Sokovia, or just his sort of general disillusionment with the ruling powers and the military forces that rule over the lands that he grew up in. I don't think that he's a bad guy down to the bone, but I do think that there are a lot of traits in there that do attribute him well to being a Slytherin. Or maybe a Ravenclaw. He is quite a smart person, he's quite creative with his planning, but I think ultimately it takes a lot more sort of cunning and deviousness in order to come up with a lot of the weird contingency plans that he had in Civil War. The many different backups that he had for if one plan fell through, as a lot of people have pointed out, came off as quite convoluted, but actually was just sort of over-planning. I think because of that, he could quite easily be either a Slytherin or a Ravenclaw, but I just hand it to Slytherin in this case, because he's just a little bit more nefarious than you would have to be a Ravenclaw, I think. The final major character from Falcon and the Winter Soldier I'm going to talk about is Sharon Carter. And there isn't really much to say with her, there's not a huge amount that we've seen from her throughout the film so far, other than that she appears to be a devoted agent for S.H.I.E.L.D. until they fall, and then is devoted seemingly to Cap, and I guess now to Bucky and Falcon, I assume. I don't know how she's going to fit in exactly, I assume that's the way it's going to go. I reckon she's probably a Gryffindor, maybe a Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw would work quite well if she is sort of a rule follower, but as we've seen, she is able to rebel. I think ultimately, probably Gryffindor. Now onto the main event, and that of course is WandaVision. Now to kick things off, I'm going to start with a quick rundown of a few people who I think there isn't too much to say about, or they were really easy decisions. I'll go through them now really quickly. Now first off is Sword Director Hayward, who I think is a Slytherin. There's clearly too much planning and conspiring and sort of a little bit of underground evil going on there. I think he's definitely a Slytherin. Next up is Billy and Tommy. Now I think Billy is probably a Ravenclaw. He seems quite smart. He was attributed as being the geeky one, the geeky twin. And then Billy, who I think is probably a Slytherin because he's quite mischievous. Although if he mellows out with age, he could easily be a Hufflepuff as well. And then finally on the quickfire round is Agnes. Now although I think Agnes is a very interesting character and they're going to explore her a lot more, I think it's just an easy decision. She's definitely a Slytherin, no questions about it. I mean, just watch her weird little, she was behind it all, weird little title song thing that was going on in episode 7. That says enough. She's a Slytherin, she's manipulative, end of. Now on to Darcy, who actually I thought about quite a bit because I wasn't 100% sure which way to go. I think she could either be a Ravenclaw or a Hufflepuff, which are kind of two houses that don't ordinarily get put together when someone is a mixture of two. She has a general sort of Hufflepuff vibe. She's very friendly, welcoming, quite a loud, hospitable person. But then also she's really smart, cunning, creative. She's like very insightful as well. And I mean, she has a doctorate. She's clearly a very smart person. She just gives off these general Hufflepuff kind of vibes with her personality, especially in the Thor films, where she seems a bit like a little bit of a layabout, but clearly a hard-working layabout, which again is a Hufflepuff trait. I think in the end I'd probably edge towards Ravenclaw because I think that her smartness and her insightfulness is really going to shine through going forward in WandaVision, and so I think because of that it's probably slightly more dominant than her Hufflepuff traits. Then we have Agent Jimmy Woo, who along with Darcy is now part of my favourite Marvel double act. I just think the sort of chemistry that they've got going on at the minute, and in fact the chemistry with Monica as well, who's coming up in a second, is just really good, and I'm really enjoying that part of the show. Now, I think Jimmy Woo is a law-abiding, by-the-books Ravenclaw. However, I think his perception of the world is opening up quite a bit, thanks in part to Scott Lang sort of showing that there are more important things than following the rules. I think he's a really interesting character, and I think he's going to get more of his own sort of moral compass going forward. We've already seen that happening, the way that he's going against Sword's wishes and all that kind of stuff. And I also think that he's going to be the new Agent Coulson of the MCU. He's sort of the grounding person who sort of makes everything a bit more realistic, and the fact that everything's so weird is going to be shown to be even weirder by his normality. I think he's a great character, and he's a Ravenclaw. Next up is the last member of that weird little rebel trio that's going on outside of the Hex, and that of course is Monica Rambeau. Now I think Monica is a textbook Gryffindor. She's got that sort of rush-in mentality that sort of doesn't quite think everything through before she acts, which we've seen already countless times throughout the series. She's definitely very brave and courageous, and she also kind of has this, I don't know how to say it, this kind of chosen one mentality kind of thing. She feels like that she's been built up to be quite important, and of course from the house that brings you Dumbledore and Harry Potter, that kind of fits in quite nicely. Moving on to Vision now, who I think is definitely a Ravenclaw. Now, although he has a few Gryffindor leniencies, of course he's quite brave and courageous, but you kind of have to be a hero, let's get that out of the way. He's definitely a Ravenclaw. His hyper-intelligence, his cold hard logic, the fact he's a computer, that basically means that he kind of has to be a Ravenclaw by default. I think he'd fit in very nicely alongside the Cho Changs, the Professor Flips. Also, I mean, could Vision even be sorted? I mean, he's technically an object. I don't know how the sorting hat comes into contact with AIs. I don't think it really has much contact with AIs, but who knows? Finally, on to the Maximoff twins, and starting with Pietro. Or Peter, or whatever he is. Now, first of all, there's definitely something else going on with Pietro. I don't know what it's going to be exactly, whether he's a little bit more evil or whether he's being manipulated. As we've seen, he was brought into this sort of reality by Agnes in some way, using probably the Nexus that appears to be going on underneath her house. But let's just go based on his character from the X-Men series, from the X-Men films, and from what little we've seen of the sort of more normal sides of him from WandaVision so far. And that, of course, is a character who's quite laid back, very much, let's see how this is going to work out kind of thing. but also extremely loyal, driven by family and connection, not wanting to sort of be alone and that kind of stuff. And I don't know, what better way of categorizing a speedster than by being a Hufflepuff, because they're so hardworking. Literally, he has to work harder than the average person in order to move because he's fast and he burns more energy. I think he's definitely a Hufflepuff. It suits him really well. And finally, onto the star of the show, if you'll pardon the pun. And we're going on to Wanda Maximoff. Now, Wanda, I think, is pretty much definitely a Slytherin. Now, she's not particularly evil, and this is what I was talking about earlier on in this video, that just because you're in Slytherin doesn't mean you have to be evil and that kind of stuff, and she is an example of that. I mean, clearly she has some evil, dark tendencies, of course, but I think mostly it's just because she's so manipulative and she's sort of pulling strings in the background of things. Now, as it's been alluded to in episode 7 of WandaVision, she isn't pulling all of the strings, but I mean, she's certainly pulling a few of them. I mean, she might not be the main puppet master, but she's definitely helping out somewhere in there. And just generally, throughout the MCU so far, she's been just sort of manipulating people. I mean, it's what her powers are. In a very similar way to part of the reason why I put Pietro in Hufflepuff, because his powers are basically fundamentally hard-working. Her powers are fundamentally manipulative, and therefore I think that, of course, she's definitely a Slytherin. Also, if you take what she's doing very literally, she's kind of a leader. She's literally controlling an entire town, kind of, maybe, partially, who knows. She's doing some of it anyway. So, in a way, she's kind of leading all of those people. Kind of messed up way, but a way, nonetheless. Now then, I've talked about all the notable characters from the sort of imminent upcoming Marvel TV projects, or the ones that are still going on at the minute. And just before I wrap things up, I just wanted to talk about one little thing that I've noticed so far from watching WandaVision. And that is a very strong Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. connection. And I know I harp on about this show quite a lot, but I really am interested by all of these little clues that have been dropping so far. Now, I started to notice this a few episodes ago, as did a lot of other people on the internet, when they had that Hydra soap advert, which of course is a kind of reference to the episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. where Coulson's in the framework and he believes that Hydra are brainwashing everybody through little blue soap bars, and then he makes his own soap, which is just a hilarious part of the show. It's so funny. But that got me thinking, because the framework, in particular from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., has sort of cropped up in a number of different ways so far, in a few little Easter eggs dotted out throughout the series. Now, one thing that I noticed in this episode was the little hula girl on the dashboard of the truck, stolen by Darcy and Vision. Now this, of course, for me at least, alludes to the whole Tahiti aspect of Coulson throughout Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He, of course, was brought back to life using this Project Tahiti, where he was implanted with memories that he'd been on this sort of recuperation retreat to Tahiti, where really he'd been being injected with alien blood. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but if you haven't watched Series 1, I don't think you're going to yet. Now, I think that this is an allusion already to the fact that Vision's kind of being brought back to life as well throughout this whole thing. In a very similar way, this Hex is kind of like Tahiti, and in another way, it's kind of like the framework. Another strong connection that sort of alludes to this is the whole Nexus thing. If we look in the basement of Agnes's house, you can see at one point a book that's kind of on a pedestal. Now, a lot of people out on the internet, and myself included, believe that this could be the Darkhold, which of course itself was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And what series of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did that appear in? Oh, it was the framework one. Now, the Darkhold was used to create the framework. There was some science going on before that, but they never really got everything working perfectly until the Darkhold came in. Now, in the comics, the Darkhold is a book of spells, of dark magic. It's made of dark matter, kind of from the Hell dimension. And it has all these secrets in it of connecting universes, of bringing matter from other universes, of weird different magic and stuff that you really shouldn't know about and that kind of stuff. And supposedly the Darkhold went missing. It was being kept in the Sanctum Sanctorum by Doctor Strange, but apparently it went missing during the events of Infinity War and Endgame, and this could be it resurfacing here. Now also, I'm probably wrong on this, but I thought that the voice that was talking to Wanda off camera, when she was confused about the fact that the people off camera were talking to her, I think sounded a lot like Clark Gregg, to be honest with you. I think it probably won't be. It was probably Agnes manipulating her voice somehow, because as was revealed, she is behind everything. But I thought it sounded like Clark Gregg. Now, if you want to hear a bit more about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I was thinking when I was doing this video in the planning of all the houses that the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. characters might belong in as well. I have considered all of them, and if you want to know more about them, go follow our socials. They're down in the description below, where I'll be posting something about all of those in the coming days. So there we go. There's all my thoughts on where I think all of the different Marvel television characters in the sort of imminent upcoming projects belong in terms of Hogwarts houses. Now, what do you think? Do you agree with any of my opinions, or do you think I'm dead wrong? Please do let me know in the comments below. Also, what do you think of this weird Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. connection that's been going on? Do you agree with me? Do you think there's something there, or do you think that they're just Easter eggs? Now, of course, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. thing, just as another quick aside, it wasn't completely wrapped up. As we saw in the finale of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there was this whole thing about how the agency still exists, how Mac's still running it, how Melinda May is running the academy. I don't necessarily think it's going to turn up in WandaVision, but S.H.I.E.L.D. for sure isn't dead. Let me know what you think about that down below, and of course, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, and until next time, I will see you in the Hex.